So first of all, welcome to the Idaho Partners for Good Breakthrough Series. Today we are featuring a friend of mine, Megan Hudson. And so we wanted to set the stage for Megan by just giving you a little bit of insight into the series itself. So I'm going to, in full disclosure, I'm Blossom Johnston, and I'm the founder and director of Idaho Partners for Good. But this is my first time hosting the Breakthrough Series. It's normally done by a very, very amazing younger person whose name is Lavanya Sitan Raju. And so if I bumble through this, please just a little bit of grace as I figure out how to do this. So Idaho Partners for Good, this is who we are. We want our communities to thrive because our investments develop stronger, healthier, better equipped nonprofits that are then able to do more of what they do best. And the way that we do it is by reinventing how people give, how they share their expertise, and how they do greater good together. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to introduce our speaker today. And that is Megan Hudson. I got to know her last year. We met, and I knew from that very first meeting that she was someone that I wanted to learn from and work with. And so this past year, we have been doing that. She has been one of the founding leads for our pilot project with Boise Bicycle Project. Megan has her own consulting firm called Team Builders Consulting. She's had the opportunity to work with lots of local businesses, providing expertise on team building, leadership, development, change, project management, you name it. She is also full-time with St. Luke's Health System as their organizational development manager. She's responsible for creating and facilitating workforce development workshops, and she partners with leaders to develop effective and meaningful team building activities. We all know how important that is, especially in a time when most of us are still virtual. So as I turn it over to Megan, think about one thing that you, as you're going through the presentation, identify one thing that you want to work on, and we'll have you share it at the end. So Megan, I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay, thank you, Blossom, for that wonderful introduction. And I'm going to make sure that you can see my screen. Let's see. Can you see the full screen? Just want to check. I'm new to Zoom as well. Can you see anything?
Yes.
Okay, see the full screen. Great. Okay. I just want to reciprocate my enthusiasm for the friendship that Blossom and I have started probably about over a year ago. I was so excited when she introduced herself through mutual friends and shared her vision with me for Idaho Partners for Good. And it's just so exciting to see what this organization has done for our communities. And I'm really happy to be a part of it. So thank you, Blossom, for that. Today, we got a lot of information to talk about when it comes to change and our adaptability to it. And so this is a new word that is getting actually some quite getting a lot of attention in organizations is your adaptability quotient. And we're going to talk a lot about what that means to us and what that means to our organizations as we go through many, many changes throughout the organization's lifetime. And so we've heard of IQ, we've heard of EQ, and so this is now something that we can add to our toolkit and our skills as our ability to adapt. So before we do that, though, what I'd like to do is go ahead and we're going to break you up into breakout groups, and we're just going to get to know each other and network a little bit here, but also talk about change and what we feel change is like to us. So when we put you in the groups, I just want you to be prepared for to answer one of these sentences here. So when you think about what change is like to you, do you feel that it's like a new pair of shoes, an ice cream sundae, a roller coaster, or is change like climbing a mountain to you? So again, when we put you into the breakout groups, all you need to do is answer complete the sentence there and share with your team why change is like that. Why did you pick that image? And to help move things along, we'd like to have a facilitator in each breakout group. So if you were the person that had the first birthday of the year, then I'd ask you to be facilitating your group. You can share first, or you can ask someone in the group to share once you've done your introductions. And we need to be mindful of time. So we'll give you about 6 minutes to go through this activity. So we will go ahead and Blossom will break you out into groups, and we'll see you in 6 minutes.
I think I did it wrong. Hold on, folks.
Just when you're done, Blossom, you get another one pops in.
I'm trying to move. Remy, I'm trying to move you to a breakout room.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay. But I'm not very good at it. Let's see. There we go.
Love your name, by the way, Blossom. How
Thank
wonderful.
you. All right, there you go.
Thank you.
All right, now how do I go to a room?
I think if you have the list, sometimes they have the little join button that you can pop in and out, but I don't know.
Yeah. That's
And
what
I just want to confirm, you see the full screen. You don't see my,
Yep.
my presenter. Okay, good. Just want to
Yep.
confirm. Sometimes I get my, my screens mixed up.
Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay. I hope I'm not messing with them. Okay. 4 minutes. Yeah, I know there's a way for me to toggle between the rooms.
Yeah. Can't remember if I was a host or co-host, but I remember that there was you had the list. I just
Yep.
remember seeing the little white box and the join button, but again, I'm not sure.
It's not showing up on the breakout room
Oh.
list. That's why I'm like, oh, what am I missing?
There's Allie. I think that's from my work there.
Allie, we're not going to put you in a breakout room just because they're about halfway through. So go ahead and unmute. And so we're going to just ask you the question that they're talking about in the breakout room. Okay. And you can put it in chat if you'd prefer, but answer the question. Change is like a new pair of shoes or an ice cream sundae, or like climbing a mountain, or like a roller coaster.
Oh, she can't unmute herself.
Okay.
Okay. So
Climbing a
now,
mountain.
Allie,
Okay.
you could type fast, Allie. You can tell us why you compare change to climbing a mountain. So. I don't know if we can unmute her. She says she can't unmute herself. That's interesting. Okay, work involved, good. Find my chat here.
Okay, I'm bringing them back in.
Okay.
Okay.
So
People are yep.
Okay, it looks like I've lost my ability to see people in the chat, so I'm just gonna have to, I don't have my controls went away.
Well, darn this Zoom.
But that's okay, as long as, if you don't mind, because they will be
I will be
participating in the chat.
watching.
If you can just, share with me what they put in the chat as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. It seriously just disappeared. So, okay. Well, welcome back, everyone, and thank you for your patience. That is an aspect of having a high AQ, is being able to adapt. So we appreciate you being able to adapt with us as we're learning this technology. So just real quickly, we won't have time because of time, we won't have time to actually call out and ask some of your answers that you had. But this is an activity that I facilitated several times with teams who were going through change. And it's also my first tool or tip for you to use within your organizations, because it really can give you a lot of insight as to how your teams and actually individuals feel about change. So typically with people who select new pair of shoes, see if this was common to some of the answers that you talked about in your breakouts. But a lot of times people who say that change is like a new pair of shoes, they'll say, a new pair of shoes is kind of uncomfortable at first, and sometimes it even hurts and you get some blisters. But with time, if you just continue to wear in those shoes, it gets comfortable, and it's much easier to be in those shoes. Some said that they buy a new pair of shoes and they look at the new pair, then they open their closet and they have the same style and multiple pairs of the same style of shoes. So sometimes change seems just like to repeat itself. And then they also gave some really good insight to say, if the new pair of shoes never becomes comfortable, it's very easy to slide back into an old pair of shoes that we're familiar with. And so I thought those are really good explanations of why a new pair of shoes is like change. If you choose the roller coaster, this is interesting. You kind of get some mixed answers. Some people look at a roller coaster as very exciting and kind of thrilling, but also some will say, it's actually kind of scary to them. And most would agree that if they choose changes like a roller coaster, they're acknowledging that there's some physical reaction to change, and sometimes it can make us queasy and definitely cause some stress. There's lots of twists and turns, and sometimes you hit that peak and you think that everything's over, and then you take a huge dive down and plunge down. And also when it talks about just the rapid pace of change, that finally the ride ends and you just barely can catch your breath before someone hits the lever and off you go again for another ride on the roller coaster. So some people that choose that just feel that change is very constant and also very stressful. If those that chose climbing a mountain, you might have also answered this way, that most, I kind of associate people that choose changes like a mountain to the late adopters. When you look at change management theory, they're more methodical and they're more analytical in their approach to change. So just like when they come up to the base of a mountain, they want to be prepared. So they're not going to go and just climb a mountain just because it's there. They're going to take a lot of time to learn about that, to make a plan, to have a map, to make sure they have everything they need. So do they have the right gear or resources? Do they have some training? Possibly they need a guide. And once they start to embark on this journey, they'll usually want to stay on a certain path. But they also realize that sometimes there might be obstacles or challenges in the way that we have to take a new path. And they also emphasize that it's good to rest, right? It's good to take a break if they can and regain their energy so they can continue forward. But they also say that when they hit the top of that mountain, they feel a big sense of accomplishment, so that they made it. But they're definitely a little bit more methodical in their plan when change happens. And lastly, we have our ice cream sundaes. And this group of people, they usually see change as, they welcome change, right? They get kind of bored with the status quo. So they like to compare change to an ice cream sundae because it's always different, right? There's a lot of variety. We can have different toppings, different flavors. It's dessert, so we look forward to it, right? It's something to anticipate and be happy about. And they do also caution, though, if you eat too many sundaes at once, you could get a bellyache. And so sometimes you have to have stuff in moderation, but they see all change is really a good change and very optimistic, and look forward to those types of things to come. So again, this is a great exercise. It normally only takes maybe 10 to 20 minutes, depending on the size of your team. You can do it virtually like we did, or when I've done it face-to-face, I just get flip chart paper. I write, a new pair of shoes on the top of the flip chart paper, and then I have them write in the word because. So they all go to the flip chart paper that they feel best associates how they feel about change. Once they're there, they write the word because, and they have a group discussion to come up and share how they feel about change. And the reason I like this, it gets people talking, it gets them thinking, but if you're the leader of those teams, what's really important is that you're going to have some pretty good insight about how your team feels about change and how the individuals within your team feel about change. So you can better prepare yourself to better prepare your people for upcoming changes, knowing how that some might need more support than others, and others actually might be your change champions. And so it helps you build a strategy of support for your people. So highly encourage you to do it. It's a very popular activity, doesn't take much time, and it allows people who are impacted by change to have a voice with it. So if you have a pen or paper handy, you can go ahead and write this down, or just again, be ready to recall a recent change later on in the presentation. So again, I want you to start thinking about a change, hopefully that happened in your organization or to your team. And we're gonna apply some theory that I'm gonna share with you. We're gonna apply that and see how we can learn how to have a higher adaptability quotient to those changes. So right now, I just want you to think about a change that happened to you recently in the organization or team. And you will see in the chat that there's a link to download a one-slide PowerPoint presentation. And this will be on the PowerPoint, but if you want your own copy of that, you can download that in the chat. So when we talk about AQ, the adaptability quotient, again, this is a very popular topic. So there's going to be several definitions and lots of resources about AQ. And I found a definition that I think is pretty applicable, and we're going to kind of dissect it apart during this presentation. And this came from ForbesBooks.com. It basically said that adaptability is the ability to adjust course, product, service, and strategy in response to unanticipated changes in the market. So this is very heavy in the organizational need for to have an AQ for the organization and part of its culture. But I also think it's a great definition for us in general, because organizations are built full of people, and we're the ones that actually execute the change. And so we need personally to be able to adjust course in order to know that our work may change in the future, and how we do the work and how we perform the work is vital to the success of that change. And so we have to be willing and able to adjust course and be more resilient in change rather than resistant. So why is it that sometimes it's difficult to have a high adaptability quotient, and why it's so necessary? So a little bit on history. Before the 1980s, when we're looking at the workplace, we had a lot of stability in the workplace. And so we had fewer changes and longer time between those changes to actually take time to reflect and think about the change that was happening. We had time to adjust to that change, and so that we had more time to be more confident in executing that change before we got hit with another change. But in the 1980s, we were introduced to the internet, and with the boom of technology, that completely changed the workforce landscape. And what we found now and today is what we've completely flipped our environment. So now we have less stability and more change. And to complicate things, not only do we have more change, but we have multiple changes that are happening at the same time, and they're impacting employees at different levels. And so for the organization, this is definitely a challenge to have to manage all of that change. And for the employees, it's a challenge to try to perform the work to the quality and the standards of the expectations that we have when the work is constantly changing. And so it can be very overwhelming and very frustrating. But this is the world we live in. We are now more connected, and we call it a messy world, because we need to be able to adapt to the fact that, and accept the fact that we are living and working always in change. Great book out there that I just started to read called Life is in the Transitions. And I read an article that was an interview with the author, Bruce Feifler, and he talked about the disruptions that we encounter in life. And again, how can we handle those disruptions? How can we be strong and keep moving forward when we're dealing with, he calls life disruptors and life quakes, meaning a lot of change happening to us at once. And he said, one of the first things that we have to do and what we have to realize is that linear life is dead. So we're never going to go back to the sequential form of work. We have to be able to pivot, and we have to be able to change our minds and decisions and move forward in different directions constantly. And so we have to be comfortable living in that messy world. And one of the reasons that we are working in that type of environment is because we are living in what we call a VUCA world. And we don't have time, but I did give Blossom a resource list, and there are some links in there to some pretty short videos that are actually, I think, are pretty insightful on understanding what we mean by living in a VUCA world. This term was coined in the 1990s by the military, and it was used to help train the military and soldiers when they go into these environments, that they're going into an environment that is completely unstable, that there's no predictability, and that they need to be comfortable in that environment and be able to, what we call pivot, be able to change decisions, change directions in order to stay close to the goal. And so you have to have that confidence going in that you do not have any stability, and so you're prepared for any type of change that happens suddenly. So VUCA in a nutshell stands for a world that is volatile, is uncertain, is complex, and ambiguous. Gosh, that word is so hard for me. Ambiguous. And so when we understand that this is the type of world that we live in, now we can actually prepare ourselves for future events. And so we're more confident to be able to move through those events and move through those events successfully. A webinar that I listened to with experts on VUCA and change, they said something that really resonated with me. And they said, you have to understand that we are now a global community. We are connected. So imagine that we are all connected in relationships similar to a spider web. And so we have to remember that because we're connected, if we pull one piece of that spider web, everything within the web is going to move. And I think that was really significant to remember that we all are impacted by changes, whether we're in control of that change or we're a recipient of that change. And so that is why it's even more important to have a strong adaptability quotient so that we can be able to pivot quickly and get back on course and meet our goals. So one way that we can prepare ourselves to live in a VUCA world is actually look back in history at those organizations that actually failed to survive in this type of world. And if you Google top industries or top organizations that failed, you're probably going to get some of these companies as examples, and there's a lot more. So I was reading an article, and they did a really good job of explaining why these companies who were top of their industry, they were leaders in their industry, why they failed. Many went bankrupt, or many really lost their position within that industry. So before I share with you some of the insights from that article as to how these industries failed to pivot in a VUCA world, in the chat, and I apologize, I can't see the chat, so Blossom's going to have to summarize for me what you put in the chat. But if you use the chat, what I'd like to know is, why do you think they failed? What was happening that they were not paying attention to or refused to pay attention to that actually caused them to lose their position? So go ahead and type what your thoughts are in the chat. Blossom, are we getting any answers?
Starting.
Okay.
They ignored changes in the marketplace.
Okay.
Held on to the old ways, refused to think outside the box.
Yep.
Didn't meet new consumer needs. They thought they knew better than others. Failed to recognize changes in competition.
Very good. I think someone read my slides. You guys nailed it. That's right. And again, it usually was more than one thing that was not being done or that was being done that caused this to happen. But yes, you nailed it. That what happened is that they were really, to be honest with you, overconfident, or ego took over. And they became complacent and felt that nothing was going to change. You couldn't improve the product or the service. You couldn't replace the product or the service. They wanted something different than what Some of you had mentioned the trends are what the consumers wanted, and so they pushed their ideas instead of listening to their consumers. Some were just in complete denial. They were afraid to make those changes, so they weren't willing to take a risk. And what I thought was really interesting is that second box on the left is that they failed to be innovative when their current product was at its prime. So they rode that wave, but then after that wave crashed, they had nothing. And so I thought that was a great way for organizations to remember that we can never be complacent, that we should always be pushing to see what we can do to be better and to be able to survive in all this change that is happening. So again, I think
Megan, I'm going to interrupt you for a second.
Please.
Because you are referring to a slide that is not up.
Oh, what slide do you see?
None.
No slides. Okay. Let me hit end slideshow. This is interesting. Okay. Sorry. Let me try it again. Let's see. Are you able to see it now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. I was just chatting away, having a good time. Okay. So here are the answers. And again, your answers were spot on, and I see my chat is back. That's good. Okay, so something happened there. So, okay. So again, I think this is a great way, especially if you are in a position in your organization where you are a change manager, project manager, or even a leader, or just a change champion. This is a great way to encourage the decision makers in your organization to take some time to look back in history and look over your industry and look at those trends and to see which people are still thriving, or which organizations are still thriving, and which again are now no longer existent, because we want to avoid those same actions that they did so that we can make sure that we can keep surviving and moving forward. So another thing that I just love, and this is again the handout that you have in the chat. If you see in the bottom left-hand corner there, it says Beyond Change Management. This is from the book written by Dean and Linda Anderson, and I love this book. I tell everybody, I feel like when I was reading the book, I had a consultant right next to me about organizational change. They're based out of Colorado, and just some great insight and tools that you can use when you're even thinking about an organizational change, all the way to actual execution and sustainability of that change. They have some just great tools for you to use. And one thing that I really loved about this book was a very simple exercise, but I think it's very helpful for two reasons. So they talk about understanding the drivers of change, and we can use this in two ways. So one way that we can use this drivers of change worksheet is to understand, again, to look ahead and to hopefully predict what might happen in the future so that we can be better prepared for it. And if you notice with these drivers of change, I always like to point this out to my leaders, that oftentimes what is driving an organization to change is outside of the walls of that organization. So just like you had mentioned in the chat, consumerism is a huge driver of change, as well as technology. And then we also have to look at our industry, and do we have changes in our regulations or laws that are going to actually change how we do the work? And then again, we want to look at trends. So how do we stay viable and interesting to our customers and our consumers? So again, this is external factors that are going to actually impact our organization, because again, we all belong to that spider web. The other drivers of change, this is within our organization, and this is really the responsibility of those senior leaders of the organization. They are going to be setting the path for the employees to follow, to be able to execute the work and also execute on the changes that are made. And so we need to align our vision and goals and brand to the mission and values of the organization. And so the organization does have some control over that and is able to promote why it is important to be a part of that community, right? Why it exists. And then lastly, we do have some control over the drivers of change, and that comes down to our own choice of how we want to behave and our mindset that we have when it comes to change. And leaders of teams certainly have a huge influence over the behavior and mindset of their teams as well. And so this has a lot to do with just the resilience or the resistance that we have when we look at a change within an organization. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about this, because sometimes, and I know working with employees, they're just overwhelmed and they feel that they have no control, that they're helpless. but they actually do have a little bit of power just by deciding how they are going to strengthen their adaptability, right? How they're going to use their adaptability quotient to get through that change and to move forward. So they are a lot more empowered than they think, and it's our job to make sure that they see that. So if you've downloaded the file that we sent you, or you can just look here on the screen, I want you to go back to the change that I asked you to think about at the beginning of the presentation. And now that you have a better understanding that there's always multiple reasons that the change must happen, or again, we might not survive, I want you to go ahead and in the chat, go ahead and write down a few of the things that you realized was driving that specific change, was driving your change. Okay, so we have some people typing in. So we have COVID, which we can attribute to the environment. We have state law, disruptive technology. Okay. Okay, so good. It sounds like a change of staffing, of key staffing. Business imperatives, culture, leader mindset. So many drivers there. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So moving on, again, I've used this when I've been in a change management role and had to work with leaders on this organizational change. Is first of all, we need to identify what is actually driving that change, because that's going to help us make our decisions and learn what we need to do to prepare the organization to move into that change and adopt that change. So this is really helpful for us to make sure that everybody is understanding why that change must happen. And more importantly, what are the risks if we don't change, right? What will happen if we choose not to change because of these drivers? What could we put at risk to the organization? And another reason that I love this, and this is where I really use this drivers of change spreadsheet, is when we're looking at how to help employees understand why the change has to happen. So I think all of you would probably agree with me that, you know, our time is pretty set. When we come to work, there are things that need to be done in the amount of time that we've been given. And so employees, they're usually not the decision makers. They're not setting the strategy. They are the ones who are supposed to be executing that strategy and performing the work. And so their vision oftentimes is very limited to what they do and who they interact with on a daily basis. So we can help build that organizational acumen by being able to message to them and help them understand why the change is happening. It is probably the biggest complaint that I get from employees is they have no idea why this change needs to happen. They do not see the value of it or the reason. And so when we talk to leaders who are making those decisions and making the strategy, oftentimes I'll pull this drivers of change out and say to them, okay, so what's going on and what's driving the change? And then we take that and we mold that into our communications with the employees. So we are really improving their ability to look beyond their lens and look beyond even the organization and understand how all of these factors are impacting the organization. In order to be successful, we have to change. And so it's a great way to educate our employees and also get them to be more quicker adoption to the change and support of the change, and also for them to decide how they're going to be resilient instead of resistant to that change. So again, it's a great way to prep for communications, is to really share why that change is going to happen. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the importance of high AQ for organizations, that as a culture, organizations really need to work of having a high adaptability quotient in order to survive. But I think we all know that when we think about change, it's very personal. And so we all need to have a high AQ in order to thrive. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that behavior and mindset. So what can we do personally to make sure that we're prepared for change that's going to happen to us, whether it's in the workplace or in our personal life? So real quickly, when we think about change, I like to say we talk about change in the brain. So most of us really have lived through routines and patterns, and there's a reason for that. When we have stability and we can have predictability, we feel safe, we feel comfortable. And so then our brain can relax a little bit, but it is always aware of our environment and our surroundings because it wants to keep us safe, it wants to keep us alive. So having routines and patterns helps us move forward and be more positive. But as we know, in a VUCA world, there is less stability and a lot more change. And so a lot of times what will happen when a change occurs, and again, it could be not a significant change, but it still could be a change that's going to impact that person at some degree. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll just kind of go back to that fight or flight response in our brain, because all of a sudden we're not stable, we're unsure, we don't know what the future is going to be, and we have to move forward not having a clear plan. And for some people that can be very, very, very difficult for them to do. Other people, like I said, are risk takers, so it's kind of fun. They kind of like the fact that it's unknown. We really don't know what's going to happen or what the results will be. But having a high AQ will help us eliminate some of those fears and realize that we are confident, we're still moving forward, even though we may not have all of the answers as we move forward. And so when we make a point and make an effort to be able to be more adaptive to our environment, we are definitely going to be more stable quickly. We're going to have a firm direction. We're going to have an idea of where we want to go, but be able to pivot at a moment's notice and be okay with being able to pivot. And again, we're going to have more calm, confidence, and we're also going to have more hope. We will get through this. We will keep going. And I think that we've seen this, especially in the last year and a half, we have seen how we can pivot and how we can still move forward, and we can still have that optimism that things will get better. So again, like I said, a lot of times what's driving our change is really out of our control. But these last two drivers of change, this is within our control. And again, this is how we can build our AQ so that we can be better prepared for changes that are going to come our way. So I found a great short video by Natalie Frattoʻs on talking about what does it mean to have an AQ? How can you improve your adaptability quotient? And so what I'd like to do is share that with you, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the points that she's made.
I met 273 startup founders last year, and each one was looking for money. As a tech investor, my goal was to sort through everyone that I met and make a quick determination about which ones have the potential to make something really big. So what makes a great founder? This is a question I ask myself daily. Some venture capitalists place bets based on the founder's previous background. Did they go to an Ivy League school? Have they worked at a blue chip company? Did they have a big vision before? Effectively, how smart is this person? Other VCs assess the founder's emotional quotient, or EQ. How well will this person build teams and build rapport across customers and clients? I have a different methodology to assess startup founders, though, and it's not complicated. I look for signs of one specific trait, not IQ, not EQ.
Did I hear right that you can't hear it?
It was
Is that
very
correct?
low.
It's very low? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Let me see if I can. I apologize. She's just starting. She's just kind of giving a debrief of how she assesses, she's a venture capitalist, and how she assesses who she wants to invest in. So I apologize for that. Let's see if it works again. Okay. Okay, so Blossom,
Yes,
can you tell me if you see my screen?
yes.
Okay, good. Right. Okay, so again, 6 minutes, but I thought that was just such a powerful video and really kind of made a great summary of what it means that what we can do personally to strengthen our own AQ. And so just to recap, she said, you know, remember the first thing you need to do is don't think of the past and what's happened in the past, but also think of what's in the future and what are those possibilities. What would happen if you were given a constraint? How would you manipulate that constraint in order to meet your goal? So again, I thought that was great to ask what if questions. And then the second thing she said was to make sure that you try to look for signs of unlearning, return yourself to zero. And so what can you undo and have the opportunity to learn and grow more? And lastly, again, this comes back to status quo and complacency. Don't exploit what you have, but also start exploring to see what there might be some risks and dangers ahead that could actually cause a problem for you. So always make sure that you're exploring and you're getting prepared for that future. So again, how can we do this? So when we look at, again, those two drivers of change of behavior and mindset, what can we do? So how can we put this into practice so that we can strengthen our AQ? So again, going back, again, we have to be proactive. And I think this is really important. When I work with employees, a lot of times, the reason why they are resistant to change or they're having a difficult time with change is they put a lot of their dependency on the leader. And what I encourage employees to do is to, again, do their own drivers of change and ask questions. So if they're not getting the answers that they need to feel comfortable with the change or to understand why the change is happening, then they need to be proactive. They need to go talk to their leaders or the decision makers. Many organizations have an email address that you can just, anyone can email and ask questions. And so instead of waiting for people to tell you what the change is or what to do, it's time for us to be proactive so that we can be prepared. So we need to ask what is happening and why is it happening? What's that driver? And then again, to be more open and supportive of that change, we need to stop looking at the problems that could happen and actually the possibilities. So what are the benefits that could come because of this change? And more importantly, if we don't change, what are we risking? And again, this puts us in a great mindset. But once we have that, then we can actually take action to our behaviors. And so now that we know more about the change, it's up to us to decide what we're going to do. So will we support the change? And if we will, how? How will you support the change? What are you going to do to prepare yourself and to support the organization? And most importantly, you need to look at your support system. So who can support you? So employees oftentimes are willing to do the change, but they don't have the resources or the training in order to get it done. And so again, this is where we can be proactive and we can go to our leaders and say, I understand the change, I support it, but here's what I'm going to need in order to be successful. This is what I need in order to execute that change to the standards that you're expecting. So again, we take action. We don't sit back and wait. We actually help the leaders so that we can all move forward together in that organization and be successful. And the same goes for mindset. Again, this is a driver of change that we have control over. And again, going back to that book, Life is in the Transitions, an important thing that Bruce talked about was the ability to go through the transition so that we can actually start new. We're fresh and we have an opportunity to grow and develop and to experience new things. But in order to do that, and I think this is very critical, and oftentimes because of the fact that organizations are going through so much change at the same time and trying to manage that we really don't have a lot of time to acknowledge what is now no longer. And I really encourage leaders to find pockets of time where the employees can actually talk about how things were so that they can be better prepared to let it go. And so Bruce says, he calls that the long goodbye, that we have to accept that things are never going to go back to how they were, and that we can acknowledge those experiences in our past, and we can also mourn or honor what happened so that we're ready to go forward. And too often we just place change in an organization, but we never, we actually sometimes even deny it, right? We're not going to talk about the past anymore. And that's hurtful to people, right? Because they experienced it. So I always encourage leaders, and there's lots of ways that we can actually have team members acknowledge that past. And I have seen where it actually motivates them to move forward. So happy to share some of the activities that I've done with teams to have them say goodbye so that they're ready to embark on a new change. The second bullet, I think, is very personal and might be a little bit of a struggle for some of us. Because of the change that's happening, we may have to recognize that some of the habits and mindsets that we have now are not going to be helpful for us to move forward. And so we have to be able to let go of those habits and try new things, and also have just a new frame of reference so that we're ready to take on those changes. And the third bullet is, again, that optimism that we should have, and that hope, and more importantly, that curiosity. So because of this change, we are actually going to experience things that we wouldn't have had this change not been available. And so we can have an optimistic mindset and a hopeful mindset to discover new things about ourselves. We may actually change ourselves because of the change. And so it can be an exciting time, and we can help direct that. We can decide and make goals of how we want to be in the future and put ourselves on a path that is positive and also successful as well. So again, it's good in your mindset just to take some time to have some reflection and decide what you want to do and where you want to be. And so once you decide how you're going to be, again, you can ask yourself some questions. You can choose your attitude. So you can choose to feel helpless, or you can choose to be hopeful. And you can look at possibilities instead of problems. And this is a beautiful theory that I'm starting to research as well, called intellectual humility. And this is a place where we can challenge our current beliefs and assumptions. And again, this can be a huge resistance point with employees because they, again, have their routine and their routine works for them. They're not thinking about how that routine needs to change in order for the organization to be successful. And so now we have to kind of challenge ourselves that maybe the way we think things should be is wrong, right? Maybe there is a different way to do things. And so we have to challenge our own beliefs and accept that maybe we don't have all of the answers. Okay. We have to be willing to try. So at least, we have to at least have a little bit of hope that there is some good that will come out of this change. And we have to be willing to learn and to try and to see. And a lot of times that is all we need in order to realize that this change is a positive thing for us as well as the organization. And lastly, we have to remember that we do have some control, especially when many changes are hitting us at once. It can just feel overwhelming and that we don't have any control over our lives or our decisions, but we always have control over our attitude and our behavior. And that's what we we need to control what we can. So in conclusion, just in a nutshell, how do we strengthen our AQ? First of all, we just have to do some reflection. We have to realize and accept that we live in a world that is ever changing. There is going to be more change and less stability, and that's because we live in a VUCA world. And once we accept that, we need to become comfortable in that world. And more importantly, we need to control what we can. So we can choose a mindset and a behavior that's going to help us thrive and help us to move forward and to feel confident in ourselves and in our organizations that we belong to. And so again, just real quick conclusion, thank you for adapting to us as we're learning this technology. But hopefully you found some insights and some aha moments that again can help you feel more confident in your ability to adapt to an ever-changing world, and that you can start applying some of the things that you learned today and just see if it makes a difference in yourself and in your team and in your organization. So we have a few minutes left, so I'm going to turn the time back over to Blossom. So thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you so much, Megan, for coming out this month and being our Breakthrough Series facilitator, trainer, expert. And so I learned a bunch of things about myself today in your presentation. And isn't that what we all want, is to continually learn and sharpen our skills and our knowledge. So just wanted to end with a couple of slides to give you some insight about Idaho Partners for Good. This right now are some of our impact team. They are consultants that if you use consultants, please consider using ours because you'll do double the good when you employ our impact team members who have a tremendous amount of expertise in a whole host of different types of areas, including what you were just learning about today with Megan. And then next month we have Connie Miller. She is the really recently retired Icon CEO, and her specialty is around stomping out drama in the workplace and boardrooms. So we're looking forward to that on October 21st. And then in December, we have Jenny Myers with Against PR firm, and she'll be talking about the gift of design. So bottom line is we want you to know more about what we're doing with Idaho Partners for Good and the learning that we are doing together so that we can create stronger, healthier, better communities for all Idahoans. So you can connect with us here with our newsletter. You can sign up on our website. You can follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook. So with that, thank you so much.